We'll get started. Okay, I think first up is the Land and Water Conservation Fund's reauthorization support from Nick Delacca. Welcome, Nick.
Thank you, and good morning. For those of you that I have not met yet, I'm Nick Delacca, the State Trails Program Manager here with Colorado Parks and Wildlife. And today I am here to talk about the Land Water Conservation Funds, which are up for reauthorization in 2018, this year, October, end of the federal fiscal year. So I'll go through a little bit of the history of it, and then jump into kind of what we're asking of the Commission for support in the reauthorization. So LWCF funds were enacted in 1965, and they were established to fulfill a bipartisan commitment to safeguard our natural areas, water resources, and cultural heritage, and to provide recreation opportunities to all Americans. Using zero taxpayer dollars, the fund invests earnings from offshore oil and gas leasing to help strengthen communities, preserve our history, and protect our natural endowments of lands and waters. The fund is based on a simple concept: take revenues from the depletion of one resource, offshore oil and gas, and use them to conserve parks, wildlife refuges, forests, open spaces, and land and waters. With that, like I said, the funding is from the offshore oil drilling leases and the revenue that comes from that, and it is administered by the National Park Service. And then the governor assigns it to a specific agency within the state to administer the LWCF funding. And then a little bit of the history here in Colorado. We've since 1965 and totaling more than $60 million. Scorp is a statewide comprehensive outdoor recreation plan. And when you receive land and water conservation funds, every state is required to develop a SCORP. That SCORP is what determines where the land and water conservation funds where they should go, basically, and what outdoor recreation opportunities they should go towards. Here in Colorado, we have traditionally put them towards trails, with the SCORP identifying that 85% of or more of Coloradans use trails, and that being a high priority for Coloradans. But historically, they have also went to other recreation opportunities. We've put them to land acquisition, park development, sporting fields, and swimming pools were also very popular back in kind of the 70s era too. The funding of it, the national LWCF funding apportionments, 40% of it currently goes to the state-assisted apportionments, which is what we receive. 40% goes to federal land management projects, which is usually land acquisition. And then the remaining 20% goes to other federal programs. There are some forestry programs within there. I think there's 4 programs, but forestry one, and then also like a wildlife conservation program also. Within the state apportionments, the 40% is divided equally among the states. 30% is proportioned to states on the basis of the 2010 U.S. population. And then the remaining 30% is prorated to based on urban population per states. No, that's okay. I got waylaid. Looking at the congressional districts across the state, that's usually how we track the land and water conservation funding. But just some numbers how much we've given out per congressional district. About 7.75 in CD1, and so the lowest, I guess, was CD6 at 3.83, and the highest up to 13.71 million in congressional district 2. And then looking ahead and kind of what we're asking of the commission, The LWCF Act is due to expire, like I said, in October 2018. Without the LWCF monies, Colorado will lose out on approximately $1.675 million annually. Like I said, currently that is going to trails, non-motorized trails specifically, and which we have a minimal amount of funding currently in Colorado. So this adds a large portion, it's about half of the current funding. And then, like I said, it'll have impacts to our development of trails and maintenance here in Colorado if it's not reauthorized. Currently, the State Trails Program and the Recreational Trails Committee is requesting that the Colorado Parks and Wildlife Commission support the reauthorization of the LWCF funds and also reach out to congressional district representatives for them to support the reauthorization on Capitol Hill of the funds. Within your paperwork, you also should have received a letter from the Trails Program and the Trails Committee requesting your support for it and of that 40% reauthorization. And then I also gave you all a handout this morning of an example of what could be sent out to the congressional districts of a map of all the projects. The example is Congressional District 3. A map of all the projects, how much funding has went to that congressional district, and an example letter that could go out from the Parks and Wildlife Commission requesting that those representatives support the reauthorization of the funds also. And then today here too, Christian Myers is here. He is a Trails Committee member, representative, and he's been on the committee for about 5 years. Prior to that, he was on the GOCA board and on the Boulder County Parks and Recreation Board too. So he's very familiar and with trails funding that is out there and outdoor recreation opportunities here in Colorado. And he wanted to say a few words also.
Thanks for a few minutes of your time and for your service on this commission. As Nick said, my experience on the GOCO board, we reached out to both the state representatives and the federal representatives for different cases to make them aware of all the projects and the impacts that the programs that, in that case, GOCO supported, in this case, LWCF supports in their specific areas, to actually take it home and route it to them. They're aware of stuff going on, but they might know, oh, that park over there got specifically built. And that connection to it, I think, is important for them to understand as they consider what to do with the funding moving forward. The $1.7 million we get is anywhere between 40 and 50% of what we have to spend on non-motorized recreational trails each year. So that it's a pretty big impact, or pretty big contributor to what we can actually get done on the ground in terms of trails, maintenance, planning, and new builds. So it's pretty critical to the program. It's also been under sort of continuing resolution kind of passed along year to year. They've extended it by a year several times, but we've really, the certainty of a long-term commitment to a permanent reauthorization is what we're really looking for in this space. So just request that you consider passing this along to our congressional representatives with some specific examples. I think it'll give a good message in terms of how the funds are actually being used and give them a little more education about the impact of the program. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
And did anyone have any questions?
Commissioner Spahar.
Nick, does this map that we've been provided, or that I've been provided, a third CD one, others may have different maps, I guess. Do the green dots represent just projects done under the 1.7 million annually, or are these total projects over time?
These are total projects historically since 1965. With that 1.7 almost, 1.7 million is what we've been getting the last couple years, but historically we've gotten quite a bit less than that. But the map is historically since the inception of the program.
Yeah, the reason I ask is and does this include local projects funded by LWCF, state projects, and then projects on federal lands?
This is just the state portion.
Okay, that's what I was asking, because a couple of years ago when I was doing some work on reauthorization, I had access to a county-by-county database of total spending, and it's well north of 11 million, so that helps explain.
Yeah.
Thanks.
And yeah, we can divide it up however we want
Yeah,
really
yeah.
mapping. We just did the congressional districts because that's who we're asking you all to go to and support it.
Yeah, I think just for commissioners' benefit, if, and I don't know that I can find that database I accessed again with the help from Senator Bennett's office, but it was a county-by-county breakout of state, federal, and local LWCF projects, and it is just mind-boggling, the amount of money, particularly on the national forests and some BLM lands for facilities and work, that has gone into, that flows from the Land and Water Conservation Fund.
Mr. Zimmerman.
Thanks, Nick. This is great, and please express our gratitude to the Trails Committee, of course, for bringing this to our attention and putting this together as well. The question I have is, do I recall correctly that LWCF funds were paused or on a few years ago? Did we go through a time where we didn't get LWCF funds, or maybe they were at risk?
Christian might know a little bit about that. Since I've been on within the Trails program for about 4 or 5 years, it hasn't been, but prior to that.
Conversations that have taken place over the last, probably within the last 10 years is, do they fully fund the 40% that goes to the states, or do they direct some of in
Okay.
other places? And so there's been some uncertainty in the commitment that actually goes towards the state apportionment piece, but the levels themselves, other than, is it going to be reauthorized year over year question being in the space, I'm not aware of anything to actually stop the funds.
Okay. My understanding is that the current administration, the budget would, I mean, of course, there's going to be impacts across, but that the budget would have some pretty big cuts to LWCF funds as currently proposed. How are those LWCF funds proportioned and allocated? We get 1.7. When you say full funding, is this currently full funding, or is this partial funding? Because the letter asks for dedicated and full funding, so I'm just curious what full means.
So that is not the complete, as Chris said, we haven't always gotten the full funding of that 40%. I don't have the number on the top of my head, but I believe it's around 2.5 million would be the full funding that we would receive in Colorado. And so, yeah, we don't always receive that full 40%.
And I imagine there's some sort of a calculation at the federal level that says
Yeah,
how you get to 2.5 million. Okay.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Well, yeah, for that, I'm not sure how they determine how much lower from that we receive, like where it's pulled out from that. But yeah, there is a calculation for that. And that should go off of the calculations I mentioned in the slide of the 40%, the 30, and the 30
Okay.
for it. But yeah, we don't receive the total of that, and I don't think we ever have really received the total of that.
Okay. Thank you.
Commissioners, we've got a draft letter. I hope everyone's had a chance to review it. I think we're being asked, Nick, to agree to send the letter or something like it.
Yeah, this is kind of a new process for us within the Trails program. I don't think we've come to the commission asking them to support it prior to this. But yeah, basically, one letter is us from the Trails program and the committee asking the commission to support the reauthorization. And then the other, like I said, is an example of a letter that could be sent out to the congressional district, which is, the letters are basically very similar in nature.
I'm sorry, Nick, are you asking, like, for example, the chair or the commission pass a resolution or sign these letters, or what precisely are you asking for?
I am not exactly sure on what the process should be. Maybe Madeline could dive into that a little bit.
Thank
Madeline,
you.
thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madeline West with the Department of Natural Resources. So in the 5 years that I've been at the department, LWCF reauthorization has come up several times, and from our office's perspective, often stakeholders will ask the governor to support LWCF reauthorization, but it's typically, the week it's up for hearing, or, some type of timescale that is really very difficult to turn around a really effective letter, I think, that has the type of detail in it that Nick has provided to all of you. And since the LWCF program is managed by CPW and Nick and the Trails Committee with Christian and others, it really is full of experts in this field, and they know where the money goes. Nick and Margaret and I had talked about it making a whole lot of sense for the Trails Committee to really be the start of this comprehensive conversation early, when there's lots of time to, have the conversation flow up. And since the Trails Committee sits within the Parks and Wildlife Commission and is advisory to the commission, we sort of devised a first of its kind decision-making flow, where the ask would be to the commission for this type of information to be communicated out to the public. I think the commission has discretion to decide whether you as a body would like to sign a letter, or if you would like representatives of the Trails Committee to sign a letter. Another option would be to, send the recommendation from this commission even higher to the governor's office and have the governor sign a letter of support, which we could certainly, my office could certainly bring to him for his consideration. So that's a long way of saying whatever you would like to do, I think we can accommodate.
Commissioners, any thoughts on how we should act, or not act at all? Commissioner Hauser.
Thanks. Any reason not to do all the above? Item number D, or whatever choice that is. So, okay. I mean, if we're trying to advocate for this, it would seem to me that the more the merrier.
Right. So it sounds like a communication through DNR to the governor asking for support. It sounds like the letter signed by, it sounds like the chair, unless the commission would like to vote on it, and we could do a resolution that way if you'd prefer. But is that the commission's will? I'm Commissioner Beal.
I hope that was a motion, because that's what I would want to do is a letter from the commission, a letter from the governor, and a letter from the State Trails Committee.
That sounds like a second.
That is a second. I'll make. Yeah.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? And council, I don't think I need any public discussion on that, or do I? Public comment?
I wouldn't say that it's legally required, but it is an action item, and I think your practice is to typically invite public comment on action items, so it's up to you.
We don't have any blue slips from anyone in the audience. Is there anybody that would like to comment? Okay, seeing none, then I think our vote is done, and we'll get that done for you, Nick, and appreciate all your support.
Thank you. Thank you for your
Mr.
support.
Chairman?
Oh, I apologize.
Can
Commissioner
I
Spain.
suggest that when we send these letters to the congressional delegation and the senators, that we include a map and a listing of projects in there, in the congressional districts and then statewide for the senators? I know in the past, both Senator Bennett and Senator Gardner have been supportive of reauthorization, but just to give them a better idea of the impacts in their jurisdictions.
Great, we'll make that happen.
Okay.
Any other comments? Okay, next up is, I think really one of our most important items today, so I don't, oh, okay, Craig McLaughlin up here. Are you, I thought Matt was going to present. I apologize, Craig. It's
Well,
chronic wasting disease.
Mr. Chair, both Matt and I will be presenting.
Very good.
We'll tag team this. So, for the record, I'm Craig McLaughlin, the Terrestrial Section Manager. Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, Director, Ms. Madeline, this morning we'd like to talk a little bit about chronic wasting disease with you. Now, you know that chronic wasting disease has been an issue for many of you that have been associated with it, understand it, been part of discussions on it over the years. But today I'd like to just start off with a real quick overview, CWD 101, if you will, and talk about this management issue. It's been a management issue for big game in Colorado for, as I said, a few decades. With today's discussion, and we hope this will be truly a discussion, I'd like the Commission to start to engage perhaps with some information that we're presenting and heading into the future with managing this disease. Our outline today for this presentation includes a quick look at what is CWD. This is the CWD 101 part of it, why we need to manage the disease, the history of it, primarily focused on Colorado, and our monitoring and management actions, and results of recent Cwd surveillance in Colorado, and then talk a little bit about future management, potential for future management. So what is Cwd and why it's important? Chronic wasting disease is a fatal neurological disease. It's found in deer, elk, and moose. It belongs to a family of diseases that are caused by abnormal prions, which are proteins. These prion diseases attack the brains of infected animals, causing them to display abnormal behavior, and become uncoordinated, emaciated, and eventually they die. Why is it important for us to talk about this? Why should we manage this disease? Well, Cwd has a 100% fatality rate. That means that every deer or elk that's in Colorado that's infected with it will die. And it generally takes about a 2 to 3 year period for this to happen. So it's a progressive and slow-acting disease in the body. Most of the animals will show their clinical signs within 2 to 3, up to 5 years of age, and suffer mortality at that time. So if we have deer or elk populations that are heavily infected, that a large portion of the animals have this disease, that can have a relatively drastic influence on the overall population. Quickly, I'd like to talk about our knowledge of Cwd, the timeline for it. In fact, Cwd was first identified in this state in our research facility at Fort Collins in 1967. It's 51 years ago. It wasn't until 1978 that it was classified as a TSE, which is, I'm going to give you some tongue twister words here, Transmissible Spongiform Encephalitis, which simply means that it's a disease that can be transmitted from animal to animal. Spongiform means having a spongy or porous like structure, and encephalopathy is a disease that damages the brain. So we have a disease here that works on the brain of these animals. Other examples that you've heard in the media have been scrapie in sheep and goats, BSE or mad cow disease, and Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, which is a disease that impacts humans. Let's go to the slide finally. I've been talking for quite a while. The slide here shows 2 deer. The one on the right looks healthy. The one on the left has an unsteady stance. It's emaciated, drooping head, drooping ears. Obviously, looks like a sick animal. What you don't see here in the deer on the right is that deer also is infected with Cwd. Again, this just underscores the fact that this is a slow-acting disease on an animal, and these animals can transmit the disease from one animal to another. So prevalence, or the infection rate in a population, is something that we're concerned about in terms of managing. Slide 2. Do I click it? There it is. Thank you. So I'd like to talk real briefly about the history of Cwd. As we talked, it was first identified in Colorado. By 1981, we had identified it in wild elk in this state. 1985, it was identified in wild mule deer. By the late 1990s into the 2000s, Cwd cases were reported across the U.S. and Canada. This map shows Cwd distribution in terms of states and provinces. The gray indicates provinces or states where Cwd is present in captive deer or elk populations. And the orangish yellow shows, and these are primarily at the county level, shows areas where Cwd is infected in wild cervid populations. So it has been distributed fairly widely in North America. It actually been detected now in Europe in Korea, in captive animals that were moved to Korea. Cwd surveillance in Colorado has been ongoing for quite a while, and those of you that have been on the board for a while are very familiar with past years' monitoring programs and discussions. Most of our surveillance is taken place by testing hunter-harvested deer. We've undergone voluntary sampling with hunters voluntarily submitting their animals for testing since the early 2000s, but the sampling rate, the participation rate from our hunters voluntarily submitting their samples has declined, and our estimates of prevalence have become of lower accuracy. So recently we undertook a mandatory sampling effort last fall, and Matt will be describing some of the results of that. We needed that to get more precise estimates. We've also taken some opportunistic sampling, which led to much fewer samples, but vehicle collisions or any suspect cases, we have abnormal animals appearing or acting unusual, we've taken some samples from those as well. Before I hand off the microphone to Matt, does anyone have any questions on what I've presented so far?
I think we're good.
Okay.
Matt Eckert, Terrestrial Program Supervisor. As you know, in the 2017 mandatory submission effort testing hunter-harvested deer, we were looking to improve our estimates of prevalence. We started this effort with the selection of 6 herds considered high priority for testing. In the Northwest, circled in the upper left-hand part of that map, in pink is D7, the White River herd. And just to the south of that is D42, in blue, the Riffle Creek herd. In the Northeast, we have D4, the Red Feather herd, that's in blue, circled in the top center. And just to the south of that is D10, the Big Thompson herd. And lastly, what's not circled on the map, in the Southwest, if you look to the left side and slightly down from center is D19, that's a big blue patch. That's the Uncompahgre Plateau. And just to the east and southeast of that is D40, the Cimarron herd. Then we made the decision to test all rifle season buck hunters in these units. And there was one exception, that was D42, and hunters know that as GMU 33. Both sexes were included in mandatory testing to achieve large enough sample sizes for good prevalence estimates, and there was also concern about high prevalence in does in small areas of that unit. But why do we test male deer only, and why just the bucks? Not all game management units in the state have a doe harvest, but all units do have a buck harvest. Also, bucks generally exhibit Cwd infection rates twice that of does, so we're more likely to detect Cwd when we're testing bucks. Let's talk about sample size. Mandatory testing resulted in much larger sample size, 10 times that of what we saw with voluntary deer submissions, mule deer submissions in 2016 for the same units. So mandatory testing was very effective. I'd like to thank our hunters who may be listening for the past year for submitting their samples. Without their participation, we would not have had a successful sample. So we did achieve large sample sizes and generated reliable estimates of prevalence for all 6 herds. This was a team effort across all levels of our agency, and I'm pretty proud of what we accomplished. Let's get into some of the testing results. This is a verbal report. There's no slide, so you might want to get your pencil ready. Prevalence was below 5% for 2 herds. It was around 4% in D19, the Untitled Plateau, and 1.5% in D40, the Cimarron herd. And looking back in time, prevalence was likely 0 for both of these herds in the early 2000s, and showed up at some point in the past 15 years. The 2017 test results suggest Cwd has been present in these herds for the past several years, but went undetected because voluntary submissions were low. We'll be watching to see if prevalence increases over time. But fairly good news because prevalence is still low in the southwest region. Prevalence was 10% or higher in 3 herds, 12% in D10, the Big Thompson herd, 10% D42, the Rifle Creek herd, and 15% D7, the White River herd. I'm going to give you just a bit of detail for each one. For the Rifle Creek herd, we've had small sample sizes in voluntary testing for the past 15 years and did not detect Cwd until 2015, when we tested 3 adult bucks and 1 of them was positive. We were surprised to see the 10% prevalence across the entire DAU in 2017. On to the Big Thompson herd in D10, Northeast region. Prevalence hasn't changed all that much in 15 years. In 2003, it was 11%. In 2017, it was 12%. The likely reason why we have not seen much change in prevalence for a unit that we've known Cwd has been present since the 1970s is because starting in the early 2000s, we effectively lowered deer numbers to a lower population objective to control Cwd. It appears that these management actions have kept prevalence from increasing. Let's move on to D7, the White River herd. This is where we've seen the largest increase in prevalence over time. The 2017 prevalence estimate was just over 15%, and that was from a very large sample size of bucks. Over 1,000 bucks were tested. 931 were adults. This is a 10-fold increase in prevalence from 2003, when prevalence was 1.5%. What this means is that approximately 7% of adult bucks and 3.5% of adult does will die from Cwd each year. Having such a large sample size allowed us to analyze the data at the herd level, but also the GMU level. Within this herd, prevalence rates vary across GMUs. Of greatest concern, prevalence in GMUs 12, 13, and 211, estimates now suggest this is over 25% prevalence. What this means is that 13 to 14% of our adult bucks in these GMUs will die each year from Cwd, and about 7% of our does will die. Based on the trends of prevalence in this herd, we are expecting prevalence to increase. Better news, the star of the group is the red feather herd in D4, the Northeast region. Prevalence was high in the early 2000s, around 17%. Since that time, we have taken several management actions to reduce prevalence, including increasing harvest, and this has proved to be successful. In 2017, prevalence was 5.5%, and this has stayed about stable for the last 6 years. Well, that's the review of the mandatory testing results. We can pause here and talk about that information. Excuse me. And we can also move into more detail. Next, we'll discuss and take a closer look at D4 and D7 for some interesting relationships with licensing.
Yeah, Commissioner Vehil.
Matt, in D4, the actions that we took to increase harvest, was the buck-doe ratio also changed at the same time?
Well, I can pull up the numbers. D4's buck-to-bill ratios didn't change drastically over the course of that period. If you want the numbers, I can share that with you. I've got the data here.
Well, I'm just wondering if that changing the buck-doe ratio would have the same effect in reducing the prevalence of it.
Well, we will see a similar relationship for D7 in the upcoming graph that we're going to look at. So that might answer your question.
Okay.
Okay.
Great, thank you.
Let's take a closer look at the White River D7. There's a lot on this graph. I know that. We're going to go slow. We are interested in learning how Cwd prevalence has responded to deer management actions over time. If prevalence is in any way related to license setting, then that would be an important finding that informs future license decisions in high prevalence herds. This graph is at the herd scale, D7, and I wanted to point out that this is CPW data. This is not statistics or modeling. This is actual data plotted on a graph. The bottom axis, X, is year, 2002 to 2017. The Y-axis on the left shows the total male and either sex licenses issued for each year in D7. Now let's focus on that black line only. That shows license trends over time. Male and either sex licenses were around 9,000 back in 2002 and increased to exceed 11,000 in 2005 and 6. And then after that harsh winter of 2007 and 8, licenses were cut to 4,000 in 2009. And you can see the rest of the trend, slight decrease and slight increase for 2017. But you may notice we never recovered those licenses from the time of 2007. Now let's look at the right side of the graph. The y-axis on the right shows the number of bucks per 100 does. So that's in the green, and the dotted line shows that relationship. The red line is Cwd prevalence. It is expressed as a percent. Buck-to-doe ratio is not as percent, it's the number of bucks per 100 does. So let's take a look at the left side of the graph. In 2002, prevalence was 1.5%, and look how it stayed low for several years until we sharply cut licenses in 2008. As soon as we cut licenses, prevalence started to increase. And to the right of the graph, the spiked increases in 2014 and 16, those are likely the result of small sample sizes. So they are likely somewhat unrealistic. But we can't deny what happened in 2017 with mandatory testing effort, when our prevalence is just over 15%. That is very real. Note that the trend lines for prevalence and buck-to-doe ratio have increased in the recent decade. And the trends are very similar while licenses remain low. And this actually makes sense because if you have a higher proportion of bucks in the population, and because bucks are twice as likely to have prevalence than does are, then prevalence should increase. You may be asking yourself, what is the population doing during this time? In 2005, it was over 100,000 animals. And in 2016, it was just over 30,000 animals. And those are post-hunt estimates. That's a 70% decline. And as population decreased, licenses decreased, prevalence increased, and buck-to-doe ratio increased. I think it's very clear. Let's move on to another look at D7. Taking it a step further, this graph also displays what is happening in that unit, but at a smaller GMU scale. We chose to look at 4 GMUs, 12, 13, 23, and 24, combined. Why did we combine these 4 GMUs? Because license changes are made according to hunt codes, not the GMU. For anyone that may be unfamiliar with hunting in Colorado, a hunter can hunt with a single license in several GMUs, and that's depending on the hunt code. Therefore, changes in licenses for a single hunt code may not affect prevalence in a single unit. But it should, if it's going to have an effect, it should affect prevalence in all units where that hunt code is valid. This is true for D7, for GMUs 12, 13, 23, and 24, where the single license is valid to hunt all 4 units. There are multiple groupings of hunt codes in some herds. We chose this one because it has a large number of licenses. Why third season hunt codes? We are interested in learning how changes in licensing affects prevalence. And remember, adult bucks have a higher prevalence than younger bucks. And now, because adult bucks are more vulnerable to hunters in the later seasons, because of the rut, changes in late season licenses should have a greater effect on prevalence, and especially compared to early season licenses. In many units, there are not that many 4-season buck licenses, but there are a lot of 3rd-season licenses. So today, we are looking at the changes in 3rd-season licenses over a 15-year period for GMUs 12, 13, 23, and 24. Again, the bottom axis is year, 2002 to 2017. That's the same as the graph we just looked at. The right axis is prevalence, Cwd as a percentage. That's also the same. But it's not for the entire DAU, it's just for those 4 GMUs. The left axis is the total number of 3rd-season licenses for male and either sex for those 4 GMUs. Let's look at the black line. It looks a lot like it did in the previous graph. It shows the same trend. Look at the increase in the 2004-5 and the decrease in 2008 and 9 after that that strong winter. And looking at prevalence. Prevalence is present but low in the early 2000s when licenses are high. As soon as we reduce licenses, prevalence starts to increase. Prevalence increases quickly once licenses fall to the 500 mark and continues to increase while licenses stay flat until 2017. Again, some of the sample sizes for prevalence are low between 2009 and 2016, so the trend line may be somewhat unrealistic, but the direction of prevalence is realistic because of the estimate we gained in 2017. And sample sizes were very good also in the early and mid-2000s for this unit. We can stop here, we can move on to D4.
Commissioner Zip.
So one thing that would be helpful to me is to kind of get an idea of what did the population do? Did we see a large increase in the estimated population in these GMUs?
Well, I don't have data for the GMUs right now, but for the DAU level, the herd level, population changed dramatically. It went from 100,000 in 2005 down to 30,000 in 2017. And these units are at the core of that herd.
Okay. So overall, even though cutting the licenses down dramatically, the populations basically continued to drop?
Well, I think the licenses dropped because the population dropped dramatically.
So I guess what I'm asking for is, do we have an idea of what population overall or estimated population in the DU as a whole, I guess, is fine, from 2008 to 2017, when the number of licenses were much lower and the prevalence increased?
Give me 1 second. Okay, for D7, let's say, and what years did you ask for, 2008 and 9?
Yeah, basically that from, somewhere starting in, maybe starting in 2006 would be most useful when we're still issuing fairly high number of licenses, but by 2008, that number had dropped fivefold. Just curious how the overall population numbers
Okay, so
reacted to those drastic cuts in licenses.
okay, in 2006, population post-hunt estimate was 96,000, roughly. 2007, 71,000. 2008, 56,000. 2009, 61,000. And these are approximations. 2010, 50,000. 2011, 44,000. 2012, 43,000. 2013, 32,000. 2014, 37,005. 2015, 35,000. 2016, 30,005. And I'll stop there. We don't have our solid estimates for 2017 yet.
So, and you said 15. So population kind of bottomed in 2013. Was that, you said 32,000?
Yeah, that's, I would say it bottomed this present year.
And then came up a little bit and then dipped down again. Okay. Yeah, I just kind of wanting to get to see an idea of, it's not that, clearly it's not that there was more deer and more crowding and that's why the prevalence increased. It's something else is probably leading to that.
Yeah, well, the graph suggests that since licenses were low and stayed low, prevalence increased. Now, what we can't just do is go back to licenses from the 2004 and 5 season. We may have difficulties doing that with pressure on deer, and because the population is down by 70% compared to back then. But yeah, there's no direct relationship that you're referencing.
Commissioner Zimmerman.
Thank you, Alex. I think that's a helpful question. So if our population has gone down by 70%, it looks like our number of license issued curve is starting to go up again. Are we issuing more license to try to control this CWD? Or why would the number of license issued be going up when our population numbers are continue to be going down?
Well, I don't know if someone in staff level behind me can answer that. I don't have that detail right now. But Cwd isn't a primary management concern right now. Well, the license recommendations haven't been designed around Cwd for D7.
And remember we're talking buck licenses. We've maintained a very, very limited supply of doe licenses. And your doe licenses are usually the barometer that you use against population increases or decreases. So with a declining population, we cut doe licenses dramatically. We're just talking about buck licenses here.
Okay, I think we can move on to D4, and you'll see it's very similar graph. The only thing that changes is the GMUs, 9, 19, and 91. The same relationship is present. Once we reduce licenses, we start to see an increase in prevalence. And of great interest is in 2009, we see a response that when we increase licenses from 2010 through 2017, prevalence drops. And the population of D4 was not for these 3 GMUs, but for the herd level. It was down below 6,000 in 2007, and it was up to about 14,500 in 2016. So we had more of a doubling of the herd size. So even though we doubled the herd size, prevalence stayed low. For this herd, as population increases, the licenses increased, and the prevalence decreased. The buck-to-doe ratio didn't change dramatically. So I think one of our take-home messages is that there seems to be a compelling relationship between licenses and Cwd prevalence, and this understanding should be useful for making future license decisions. Increasing licenses for adult males especially should, not adult males, for males especially, should decrease prevalence.
Matt, can I ask you a question? This is not a challenge. A lot of times when we look at graphs in the corporate world, the next question I'd ask you is, do you have any evidence that this isn't just coincidental? And what is the evidence that there's a correlation? I don't know that that applies here in wildlife, but do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I don't want to get into statistics today, but we did run a statistical analysis, and the relationship suggests that licensing strongly predicts what happens with prevalence in subsequent years. And our statistician would tell you that we don't see this kind of relationship in wildlife biology very often. We see it more in physics and chemistry.
Thank you very much. Oh, Commissioner Zip.
Can you speak to like the, I guess, the number of animals tested in order to get that red line prevalence rates? You were talking earlier about kind of differences in hunter participation and then, going to making it mandatory. So how does that figure in to these numbers here on these specific GMUs?
We have strong sample sizes for different years, and it's different according to which herd we're talking about. But we had very good sample sizes in a lot of herds in the early 2000s and mid-2000s. We had incentivized voluntary sampling in some of the herds. I think D4 was one of them. So between 2009 and 12 or 16, we have a couple of good sample sizes. I can pull these numbers up for you. And again in 2017. We did have low sample sizes. For the graph we're looking at now, we had low sample sizes in 2009, 2010, 2012 and 13, 14, 15. Some of them were decent. We had great sample sizes in 2002, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 11, and 2017.
Oh, pardon me, Commissioner Bray.
Thank you. Do you have data for the buck-doe ratios over time? Say, for example, what were the buck-doe ratios in 2006 versus currently?
I do have that, not on a graph, but I can show that to you.
You had it for D7.
Yeah.
Not D4.
I actually only have it for a couple of years. But I did look at it earlier today.
So I guess I would assume, though, they're lower today than they were historically.
For D4?
Yeah.
Let's see what we have today. Yeah, our objective is 25 per 100 females, and target is 30. Oh, we have our senior biologist here, who could probably answer this off the top of her head.
Not quite. Janet George, Senior Biologist, Northeast Region. So was the question the 2006 buck-doe ratio? Or
Well, I'm trying to get an understanding. You've given us a great correlation of number of licenses, but versus prevalence, but how has the buck-doe ratio changed over that time, or has it?
It was a little higher back in the 2006 timeframe, and it's been pretty steady for the last probably 7 or 8 years. So it was around the 35 mark back then. One thing to keep in mind is, I think, there probably wasn't a graph of this, but we had a whole lot of doe harvest in 2002, 3, and 4. Like we probably an order of magnitude increased doe harvest to try to bring the total population down. At that time, that is what we were working towards. Some of the information about higher prevalence and older bucks was not known. So when you change the denominator, you harvest more does, you bump your buck ratio up even if you don't change the buck ratio. But right now here, we've been running about the same for 7, 8 years, since about that time.
Thank you.
Does that help?
Yes.
Commissioner Howard?
Commissioner McDaniel.
So I'll try to make sure I'm getting the main point you're trying to bring across. I think I'll follow up on Commissioner Zip's comment about that. So I'm kind of drawing the correlation around license to prevalence, and then maybe I'm just oversimplifying it, but obviously if I got obviously that if it's more prevalent in buck deer and you issue more licenses and harvest more buck deer, well then the prevalence should go down. Thinking they would because they'll get harvested, they can't catch the disease. So that kind of makes sense to me. But is there a correlation you could draw then to Commissioner Bray's comment where you put that together to population, and with the harvest made, was there a longer term trend in, of course, some of these populations, and of course, across the United States? I say, of course, in some states they did complete eradication attempts, and to see if you can get rid of the disease if you have no deer. And was that successful when that population then was reintroduced and came back in? I can get where we're trying to adjust the prevalence, but I'm not quite sure how that connects to the long-term health of the herd, and then how we can build the population back up without the prevalence building back up. That's a piece of the science I don't kind of understand, and I know a lot of states have tried different things, and what your thoughts are about their success and in connection to the things we've been doing. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Spahar.
I have a little more basic follow-up to Commissioner Bray and Commissioners and my fellow commissioner here's a question. And I appreciate the effort that's gone into all this data collection and analysis. I guess what I'd like to hear on some sort of scale, 1 to 10 or low, medium, high, how concerned should the agency and the commission be about these issues? And have you gone beyond data collection and analysis for any concrete recommendations to deal with this?
Okay, I'll start with that one first, if you don't mind. We're going to get into that in a second.
Okay.
But yeah, I'm not going to give you a scale 1 to 10. We are concerned, as the entire nation is. This may be one of the leading wildlife management concerns for big game management in our country. But right now, we're not at an emergency level in Colorado. We have some high prevalence in some areas. We're going to take steps to address that. And we're not going to change things overnight. We're not going to do anything drastic. It's going to take some time to manage our herds and manage prevalence. Our information currently suggests that if we keep licenses higher, then we may have the ability to keep prevalence low in some herds. We may not have the ability to increase licenses in some herds for bucks, whether we have animals living on open spaces or other reasons. Maybe there's lots of challenges out there. We have multiple options for management on the table, and we will be considering those. As regards to what's happened nationwide, we've had a lot of failures nationwide, and we don't quite understand how to manage this disease yet. We've only been at it for a couple of decades. There have been some successes, and I don't want to misspeak here. I'm going based on memory from presentations of over 10 years ago. But in the Midwest, they had some successes with pretty drastic efforts to reduce densities, does and bucks. And hotspots were found in Wisconsin. They've been working on it for a long time, and these states are pouring millions of dollars into Cwd surveillance and management every single year. So I can get a more complete answer for you, Commissioner McDaniels. following up to this meeting.
Mr. Chair, real quick to add on to what Matt said so eloquently is that I think once you realize, and a lot of states start to realize, is we are not going to eradicate this disease. We're going to have to live with it forever, and we're going to have to learn how to manage within that, being in our deer populations that are all over the board. I think when Wisconsin, I think at the time, the thinking was we could eradicate this. And so that was the scorched earth approach to just whack them and stack them approach. And it didn't do anything. And then Wyoming, of course, took a much, much more of a control type of an approach. And I think that probably the biggest club that hit us over the head was we're not going to eradicate this, and we're going to have to learn to live with it. And how do we manage that, the biological side, but also the social side of deer and deer management? And I agree with Matt, that wildlife diseases, in particular CWD, is going to be one of the biggest challenges we're going to face as states and agencies and commissions all across the country. And luckily, I'll just say one more thing, is that Colorado has taken a huge leadership role in this, in trying to understand and how to manage this disease, and that those efforts the commission made back when to do what they did, I think puts us in a lot better position than a lot of other states as far as the data and the science, and from everyone from our biologists to our vets are the leading experts now throughout the country. And I think those decisions that the commission made back then to do management has really helped to inform where we go from here. So I just wanted to add that real quick.
Thank you, Director. Commissioner Vehil.
And based on that and the research, what kind of funds are we budgeting towards the research on CWD? And that's one question. The second question I have is, how does the prevalence of deer relate to elk? Are elk, the prevalence lower? But that's the second question. Can you?
Yeah, I'll start with the elk question first. Prevalence in elk is lower. It's as simple as that, yeah. And that's probably why we're focusing on deer right now. If it was higher in elk, we'd be focusing on elk. I can't speak to the budget for the research totals that are invested every year, but we spent millions of dollars probably in the early 2000s on Cwd surveillance and management. This mandatory test last year, just the basic cost was $157,000 alone, and that didn't include staff time. It didn't include a lot of things. It was just the basic cost of getting that going. And there's a lot of hidden costs. A lot of staff are putting a lot of time into this that we're not accounting for.
That doesn't sound like a lot of money for something that has a prevalence like this, I think. And I mean, I'm not saying let's blow the budget, but we need to stay on top of it.
Mm-hmm. Commissioner Zip.
Along those lines, I've got two questions. How well does the agency, or the wildlife management community as a whole, understand the mode of transmission from animal to animal? And number two, how does that, why is there this higher prevalence in bucks than does? And is it, how confident are we that that is really the case? Or is it have we tested enough animals and we're absolutely certain that bucks are more susceptible to getting it? So, obviously these go back to studying and really, how much do we know about this disease at this point?
Our sampling suggests that bucks do have twice the prevalence as does. That's not just in Colorado, that's in most states. There are a couple of areas, I think in Wyoming, where does have higher prevalence, but in most cases it is the bucks that have the higher prevalence, almost twice. So I think it's safe to say right now we have the data to say that. As far as transmission, we've learned a lot in the past 2 decades of how, first of all, what components of the body carry the prions. And learning that it's in urine and feces and saliva over time. It's been a development of knowledge. So transmission, why bucks have it more than does, it's probably because of the behavior of bucks, where they stick their noses where in the rut, perhaps. I used to manage a captive deer facility, and you can watch the ducks lick tarsal glands and drink the urine of the does around the buck, or around the rut. So, and maybe explain why we see this relationship between bucks and does.
Matt, I'm just trying to manage time here. Where are we in your presentation?
Yeah, we better move on.
Okay.
Let's go on to future management of Cwd in Colorado. And I'm going to reiterate a couple of these things because I think they're important points. We just made them before, but we should recognize that Colorado is not facing an emergency management situation that calls for drastic actions. We are identifying these high prevalence areas, specifically through mandatory testing, and we will take steps to address them. We now know that Cwd is an increasing concern, and we need to start managing high prevalence herds now to protect our resource. And the point was raised before, but we are not alone. There are several states facing the same challenge. So we're all going to be learning from each other, and I think Colorado is in a position to be a leader on this disease. If prevalence is not controlled and continues to increase, an increasing proportion of deer will die from this disease. And the potential population effects of this disease are now being realized in other states for the first time, where we're seeing older age classes disappear. The older bucks are dying off because of this disease. And this is why WAFA has recently released management guidelines for chronic wasting disease. I'm showing a picture of what the cover looks like. Director Broscheid and Dr. Miller, our state veterinarian, and Andy Holland, our big game manager, were on the team that produced those guidelines, and they will be used to help guide our upcoming management strategy. And here are the intentions of that strategy. We want to have a guideline that, for the agency, that determines when and how we will take management actions to reduce prevalence in select herds. And the specific actions that we prescribe will be left to the discretion of local managers because of the differences between herds. And we intend to minimize the changes to herds necessary for reducing prevalence. The strategy will set out to, first and foremost, protect herd health. Herd health is of greatest importance, even if it means changes in management and changes in buck-to-doe ratios. It will seek to reduce and control prevalence. We recommend changes in buck-to-doe ratios where appropriate. And that's because the best available science that we have, and according to WAFA's guidance documents, it suggests that increasing harvest of adult males in high prevalence areas will lower prevalence. Buck-to-doe ratios are too high in some of our Colorado herds to give us the ability to effectively reduce prevalence. And lastly, we're planning to make sure that hunting and recreational opportunities continue. The statewide strategy will not be approved in time to inform 2018 license decisions. However, small steps should be taken now in 2018 licensing to begin reducing prevalence in high prevalence herds. We haven't determined what that will be yet or where that will be. The strategy will be aligned with the WAFA recommendations, once again, pointing that out, and the Commission's policy on chronic wasting disease adopted in 2015. Moving on to what we can do in 2018. Several of our herds have sex ratios that are above above the range set in their herd management plan. We plan to issue additional buck and either sex licenses in some of these herds to move the ratios down into the objective range. This doesn't necessarily have anything to do with CWD. We are trying to manage according to our herd management plans. But doing so should begin to control prevalence. Some of our herd management plans are long overdue for a revision, and the objectives set in these plans may not be realistic. So we will be prioritizing the completion of these long overdue plans, prioritizing the ones that have high prevalence. There will be new buck to doe ratios set following public input with consideration of managing for CWD. And lastly, we recently identified 6 new priority herd units for mandatory testing in 2018. They will be highlighted in the Big Game brochure, excuse me, in the Big Game brochure. We plan to continue testing, mandatory testing hunter harvest in select herds into the foreseeable future so we can monitor what we're doing in management and how it's affecting prevalence.
So Matt, just to be clear, if I understand you right, what you're saying is we might increase in a unit buck licenses, but we'd stay within the existing management plan.
That's correct.
Okay. Commissioner Haskett.
I have a few questions. Thank you, first off, for doing all that you're doing. I've kind of been involved with this since 2002 when they've discovered the hot spot at the mother well. I have some questions and some suggestions. In our DAU 7, which is where I am, can they break out the units instead of like you did the example of 12, 13, 23, 24? Is it possible to break those out into individual licenses? I don't think we can do that this year, but can we look at that next year?
When you reference your units, are you referencing D7?
Yes.
Okay, so we have the sample size to break down the prevalence by GMU, and then we assign licenses, it would be still according to hunt codes.
Right.
So if we change hunt codes in your units, we may increase licenses if that is what the recommendation is for CWD reasons, and that would be relevant to your units.
Okay. All right. And in regards to the testing, I think participation is important. This last year, this is what we got, and it's not tied to your CID number or anything like that. If you lose this little piece of paper, you don't have any idea what your test results are. I'm wondering if we can't issue something with the actual license that's a tag that you can turn in. It's tied to your CID number. You can put they asked for UTM, which we didn't know going in. If all that information can be on that tag, and I think you might also increase participation by when it's on their license with the carcass tag, they know they have to bring it in. And that's probably not your department, but I think it's a good idea.
Licensing is listening, so we will continue discussing what we can do to better serve our hunters with testing for CWD.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Peisel.
Thank you. Thank you for the report. It's so important and so scary. And so I want to go back to something Commissioner Vigil said. I hate to ask a government agency if they need more money. I guess I would direct this question to Director Broscheid. And I know in our budget situation, anytime we spend $1 in one area, we have to take it away from somewhere else. And so I don't know that I want an answer today, but is there enough money in this program? Do we need to fund it better, taking away dollars from somewhere else?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're going to take a look at that. I think we wanted to get the commission's feeling on where we wanted to go. If it was not enough and wanted to ramp up, certainly that has a budget implication. But we'll get in there and we'll look in the budget and we'll show you. Can we you just absorb this within existing budgets, or do we need to look for supplementals? But we'll keep you, brought all along the way when we talk about finances. The other is that Congress is, because of this issue Matt brought up, of nationwide importance, that Congress is now starting to get involved, and there's a couple bills that are being floated around to dedicate funding just either through the Department of Agriculture and then to the states to help in these efforts, because it is national and international now of importance that Congress is looking at ways to fund these types of efforts. So whether that will go through or make it into the budget this year or not, we don't know. But just to put it in perspective, since 2002, Colorado spent just about $31 million on CWD related efforts, from research to surveillance and monitoring, and as well as paying for a lot of the testing. So I guess if you're in for a penny, you're in for a pound now at this point. But so we'll make sure that if we get the guidance that whatever the commission's looking to do, we'll make sure that we'll include the price tag and what this will be and how we're going to achieve that within the current budget process. So,
Commissioner Vehil.
The 31 million, over what period of time is that?
Since 2002.
Okay.
So it's just about $2 million a year.
Okay, because in looking for funds, wildlife cash might be a possibility. I'm sure that can be used for something like this.
Absolutely.
And we do have some funds there.
In the reserve as well.
In the reserve, that's
Yep.
what I mean. Yes.
Yep.
Oh, yeah.
Yep.
I think the reserve is just a little bit higher than I feel comfortable with, so please look at that.
Absolutely. You bet.
Commissioner Zip.
So kind of along those lines, is WAFA the best way to collaborate with other agencies that are, there's all these other states facing these same issues? How do we, or can CPW help facilitate really a coordinated effort among all these agencies? Because we can't solve this problem on our own. We don't have the resources for it. Sounds like it's something that's going to be, it's not going to go away. It's going to be an ongoing issue. So in order to best utilize the resources, how do we really try and collaborate and say, all right, well, what plan do you want to do? What studies are you really kind of, what this state focusing on? So we're not trying to duplicate that. We can try this study. How do we collaborate and really gain the most from the dollars we're expending?
Mm-hmm. No, that's a great point, Commissioner. That's absolutely through WAFA and even the National Association. Our folks go to those committees, they actively participate on them. And like I said, the role this agency, as a leadership role, has taken since CWD came on the scene has really set us up where our staff, in particular Dr. Miller, is getting a lot of frequent flyer miles flying around to states that now all of a sudden it is now coming online and they don't know what to do. And honestly, to brag or not, Colorado's looked at as a leader in CWD management. And so that's not only helping us, carry what we've done here in the state, but our folks have been propelled into being some of the experts in the management of this disease. But those forums provide us the opportunity to not duplicate efforts and to share what we're learning as we go. And the commissioners that were in San Diego for the midwinter WAFA meeting, this is starting to, for us as state directors, is starting to talk about diseases as a whole, and CWD certainly leading that charge. That our committee structure allows us to have those conversations at the regional and also the national level. And you're right, they're very, very important that we don't just all try to tackle this ourselves. And so that's kind of the role that through the Mule Deer Working Group that Matt referenced is one of those really important venues that we can continue to have that discussion. And I think as this becomes more and more prevalent on the landscape, it's really drawing the agencies a lot closer together to have those discussions and help us, work at the national level for national level sort of funding. And certainly that's one of the limitations that we're all facing is states can't continue to absorb this sort of fiscal impact. And that the federal government has a role as well in not only in the science this aspect, but also in the funding side.
Just one comment that, and I applaud our staff for being so proactive and focusing on this, but potential downside of being the leader is that the leader burdens the bulk of the responsibilities and the costs. So
right.
I think, we should build on what our staff has done, but really foster collaboration and encourage these other states that, we're not going to be the ones committing all the resources to solve everyone's problem. I don't know how that really plays out, but it seems like in whirling disease, there was a handful of agencies that really kind of led the charge and bared the cost of that.
So we'll be coming back to the commission with a draft strategy for CWD management this year. We're targeting perhaps the September meeting, if we can get it drafted and vetted in time. So we'll be continuing this discussion. This isn't the last time we'll be talking about this.
Matt, if you could stand by, we've got some public comment, and I'd like to,
Sure.
the staff may want to respond once we get the comment. So, Mr. McKessel, you can come forward. Welcome.
Madam Commissioners, Madam DNR, Mr. Director, my name is Tom Mitchell. I'm an outfitter out of Craig, and I was in the middle of the 2002 shoot-off at the mother whale deal. They took a 5-mile radius of the ranch and killed 1,033 deer, 278 head of elk within that 5-mile radius. There were 7 positive deer, there were 3 positive elk. And Russell George took time and came to Craig, had meetings, and convinced us that that was the thing to do. And a couple of weeks later, we ran into him and we asked him, if you had to do over again, would you do the same thing? And he said no. It was an annihilation of a herd of animals that, granted, I mean, there was 7 positives, 10 positives. But to take 1,200 lives for that, it was not worth it. So I think it has been proven that eradication procedures, and it has in Wisconsin too, did not work. But there has to be some other way. I don't know how it is, but God help us if they ever decide that chronic wasting disease is transmittable to the human. It's gonna kill us. I mean, we won't have any hunting at all. In fact, we have not booked a deer hunter since 2002 because they took all of our good bucks out and they never have come back. So we don't have anything to test. We don't have any deer. So anyway, we're still in the elk hunting business, but that's about it. But one of my questions is, what does a hunter do if his animal tests positive? What does CPW do to reimburse him or whatever? I haven't heard that yet. I have heard a lot of stuff that didn't sound very good, but I applaud you people from taking the time to research it, and hopefully we can come up with some program that will help us, and me included, and all of the sportsmen included, all of the commissioners, and all of CPW, but hopefully that'll happen, but it's a long, drawn-out process. Thank you.
Thank you. Does somebody from staff want to address the tag issue?
Oh, excuse me.
For reimbursements, we do reimbursements, and we do also reimburse the commercial processing costs when a hunter has a positive animal, if he has processed his meat. There's also a personal processing cost that gets reimbursed. I think the commercial is up to $200. And we do reissue a license, a female license, that same year if there's time to fit it into the hunting season. If not, we reissue the female license into the following hunt year. Excuse me.
And how is that communicated to the public, Matt? Is that up on the website or
Yeah, it's in our,
in the brochure or?
yeah, it's in the brochure for sure. And I'm trying to think if it's a regulation. It's in the regs as well. But where we talk about refunds, I'm just blanking on the exact reference. So, 16? Confiscating the meat, there are certain locations in Colorado that will take the positive animal for incineration or digestion, and that's not available for the entire state. So we currently recommend double bagging in garbage bags, heavy duty contractor bags, and putting it out in the landfill or with the garbage.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
Danny just submitted one.
Oh, we have another public comment from Mr. Behrens, if Mr. Behrens wants to come forward. Welcome, Denny.
Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, Director, my name is Denny Behrens with Big Game Forever, and I also was involved back in 2002 with that when Rush George came to me and asked us to gather the sportsmen together to help with that killing operation up at the mother well, and we did. And interesting to note that the fear that came out among sportsmen, and especially non-residents, when things came out that CWD was in these herds and we were killing them deer off. And I think we really need to be careful with what we're going to tell the public about this particular study and the controls that you're going to do, because fear has a tendency to get out there and we could lose participation. And we don't need any more lack of participation by hunters. And I think it behooves not only the agency, but sportsman groups as well. We need to sit down and talk about how we're going to educate the public on this issue. Don't leave the sportsman out. Help us together that we get the message out. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you have any?
Mr. Chair, I'd just add on to what Denny said and on to Matt's presentation is that, you know, what our management recommendations are is absolutely during that time is a full and consistent and broad public engagement approach onto this. And Denny's right. The states that not only you lost a lot of hunters, but the social and the political ramifications of every decision we're going to make is going to have consequences. And at the time, there's little known about CWD, and there was a lot of fear, and that fear drove decisions. And now I think we're a little bit smarter in how to temper that fear, so to speak. But at the same time, CWD's been around a long time, and our folks will tell you is there are folks who don't know what it is. So there's that education side, and then there are those that, oh, I thought that was cured, or I don't want to know if my meat is tested positive, or you know, sort of an opposite approach to what CWD is. And during this time between the next license setting and then, you know, our testing in the following year, we're going to go out broad, very, very broad. And so for me, that's kind of a reason behind some of these very moderate measures is that we do not lose the public in this, and certainly local governments, landowners, all of the sportsman groups, is that we're all talking from the same sheet of music, and making sure we don't leave those folks behind, because that would be a huge mistake for us if we did that. So that's inherent in all of those management recommendations that Matt laid out, is that we'll be engaging the public in this every step of the way. Thank you.
Thank you, Director. Do we have any comment from commissioners, or? I don't think we have any further action then. We're going to wait to hear back from you in September. Thanks very much. It was very comprehensive. It was a great presentation. I'm going to keep the break, if you guys don't mind. And Mr. DeWalt, if we could proceed with the recognition for the aquatic staff, if they're here.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning. Good morning, Commissioners, Director. We talk about a lot of difficult things at this forum, and it is my pleasure today to talk about something that's really good. I have Josh Naring here, who's our senior aquatic biologist in the Southeast region. And what I would like to do is talk about an award that Josh was part of with the Bear Creek Roundtable, and just present, he's already received this award from the United States Forest Service, as well as the Roundtable has. But I'd just like to make you guys aware of it, because I think it provides a way to answer some of these questions. So Reed DeWalt, Assistant Director of Wildlife and Natural Resources. As many of you know, the story of the greenback cutthroat trout in Colorado is kind of an assorted history. Dating back to the 1980s, we thought we had what we at the time thought was the true greenback, and through continued science and research, in 2012, it was revealed that the fish that we thought were the greenback were actually a different type of fish, and we found a fish off the slopes of Pikes Peak in the Bear Creek drainage that is the genetically pure strain of greenback. And it's found in one drainage on Pikes Peak, and it's actually a South Platte Basin fish. And the history of that fish we can go into at some other time, because I don't even understand it. But we could happily do that at another time if you're so interested. But when it was determined that this population was in Bear Creek on Colorado Springs, there was much concern about this fish and its management. And I'm going to read from this nomination form. So overnight, the Bear Creek population became a media sensation and a source of concern and controversy. The concerns were not exclusive to CPW or the Forest Service, but were shared by other state and federal partners, as well as multiple conservation groups. Those shared concerns included protection of the Bear Creek population, ongoing land management activities that might impact the population, and the challenges that laid ahead for restoration and recovery of this fish. This fish is currently listed as threatened under the Endangered Species Act. Similarly, the controversy surrounding the population was shared and voiced by the public and diverse user groups. How would the future management actions designed to protect the greenback impact recreational activities in the watershed? Sounds like a discussion we were having yesterday. Bear Creek itself lies in close proximity to Colorado Springs and receives a high level of recreation by a diverse group of users with a passion for close-to-home recreation that had become a way of life for many generations. A complex system of trails, both designated and user-created, provided motorized and non-motorized access to the entire Bear Creek watershed. Loved by many, this complex trail system presented the greatest threat to the sole remaining population of greenback trout. In addition, the multi-agency land ownership presented a challenge to coordinated management and decision-making. Landowners included El Paso County, the City of Colorado Springs, the State of Colorado, Colorado Springs Utilities, private landowners, and the Forest Service. Thus the challenge, how to provide an acceptable level of recreation for a passionate group of forest users within a watershed complicated by multi-agency management, while providing the optimal protection for unique and isolated population of a threatened species. And Josh could tell you, I'm sure, but at first these challenges appeared insurmountable. but over time, a broad coalition of partners, including municipal, county, state, and federal agencies, conservation groups, diverse user groups, and an informed and concerned public was formed to meet the challenge. This diverse group of partners would eventually come to be known as the Bear Creek Roundtable and would provide invaluable assistance and guidance in the development of the Bear Creek Restoration Project. The amount of collaboration and coordination was extraordinary, resulting in a management plan and project implementation that ensures an acceptable level of continued recreation while providing maximum protection for a threatened fish. So early on, the Bear Creek project was described as being on the brink of disaster, at least from the perspective of many in the recreational community. However, via a broad coalition of partners and intense collaboration, solutions were found that accommodated all user groups while affording maximum protection for the greenback cutthroat. The magnitude of the accomplishments was best described by Alan Hahn, who is the Pikes Peak District Ranger. And he stated, "In my career, this is the best example I have seen of a collaborative, innovative, and imaginative approach to meeting a complex management challenge. The scope and breadth of collaboration with partners and the public will serve as a successful template for meeting future land management challenges here across the region." And so in conclusion, I'd like to talk about some of the accomplishments. So to date, the Bear Creek Roundtable, as well as the Forest Service collaboration, has resulted in a watershed assessment, removal of 20 tons of sediment, fish population monitoring, decommissioning and rerouting of 4.5 miles of trail outside of riparian areas, and stormproofing of consequential trails and roads. The Bear Creek Restoration Project is truly a collaborative effort that is meeting the challenge of finding that delicate balance to serve both conservation of native fish and recreational uses. And so as you can see from the nomination, lots of neat things have been happening down there. And this is truly a multi-faceted effort. Josh sits on this roundtable as the CPW head, but there's many people in our southeast region that help us, as well as Doug Krieger, his predecessor. And the number of partners, the list is here, but there's got to be 20 partners involved in this. And so this nomination that I just read was for the Collaborative Integrated Aquatic Stewardship Award from the United States Forest Service, also known as their Rise to the Future Award. And this is one of the highest honors the United States Forest Service gives for collaboration. And Josh went back to Washington this fall and received this award from the Chief of the Forest Service, along with many other dignitaries from the Forest Service. So I just wanted to bring him before you today, recognize him and the Roundtable publicly, and just thank him for his efforts and the efforts of the Roundtable. So thank you for your time, and thank you, Josh. Thank you for that, and I think Josh would probably say just a couple words real quick.
Please. Welcome, Josh.
Thank you. Yeah, it was certainly an honor to go back to Washington, D.C. to accept this award on behalf of the Roundtable, and certainly, as Reed touched on, there was a lot of our staff in the Southeast that certainly deserve recognition. Doug Krieger started this Roundtable back probably in 2008, 2010, and it's still going on today, as well as Bob Seal, our trails coordinator. They've put a lot of funding into these trails. And then also District Wildlife Manager Cody Wigner. That's his district, and he's been heavily involved in the Roundtable as well. So definitely a collaborative effort, and seeing some good results on the ground.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. Good work. Thank you, Mr. Chair and Commissioners. Appreciate the time.
Thank you. Commissioners, I think we can take a 5-minute break if that fits in. So why don't we plan on starting back up about 10:25. Commissioners, if we could reassemble, please.
You weren't here yesterday. I'm in the middle of 3 days, 3 states, 1,000 miles. So you drove me over to help my son pack up.
Next up is our Colorado Outdoor Partnership update.
From Salt Lake City to Albuquerque. So I drove back to Grand Junction from Salt Lake Tuesday.
All right, thank you, Commissioner Howard, members of the commission, Director Broscheid, Assistant Director West. My name is Dan Zimmer, and for those of you that haven't met, I am the statewide partnership coordinator for the agency. And it's my honor to present today on the Colorado Outdoor Partnership, an award-winning leading entity that's really cool, and looking forward to talking with you a little bit about it today. However, before we get started, I'd like to introduce the two individuals here to my right that will be helping present. We have Matt Gray, he's Executive Director of the Friends of Colorado State Parks. And then we have Jim Peterson, the Colorado and Southwest Director for the Trust for Public Land. So we're really happy to have these guys here with us to show the power of the partnership.
Welcome, gentlemen.
I'd also like to recognize in the audience members of the partnership, Suzanne O'Neill at the Colorado Wildlife Federation. And that's all I see today. But Assistant Director West is on the co-op, Gary Thorson, Margaret Taylor. So in 2016, in conjunction with our Partners in the Outdoors Conference and our initial interest in the SHIFT principles, Director Broscheid called together leaders from across the outdoor industry in Colorado, representing conservation, recreation, land management agencies, and businesses, and brought them together. What was called originally the Executive Summit. And he asked this question for that group to consider. How do we advance and balance outdoor recreation and conservation in Colorado? And during the discussions at that initial summit, the group really thought that was an issue that needed to be looked at. That group wanted to make sure the abundance of Colorado's wildlife species, the diversity of wildlife species, the stunning landscapes that we have in our state, and then the world-class recreational opportunities would be here for future generations. And this concern is underscored by the fact, or these graphs that you see in front of you. Colorado has one of the fastest growing populations in the country. We're going to have nearly 10 million people by the year 2050. And when you look at these numbers, what's happening is you have an increased use and demand on our open spaces. Wildlife species are losing habitat. Agricultural lands are being converted and dried up. So the significance of this is that the amount of available land for recreation and conservation is finite. And so this group realized among these unprecedented challenges, 30-plus agencies and organizations, they decided to make an ongoing commitment. They forged a really strong partnership, and the decision was made to coalesce, make a formal structure, and what they did is they named themselves the Colorado Outdoor Partnership, or Co-op for short. So to continue the conversation, what I'd like to do is have Matt Gray come up here. Matt is the chair of the Outreach Committee for the Co-op. Thank you.
Thank you again for having us here today. I really appreciate it. I'm particularly proud to be a member of the co-op, not only as the chair and executive director of the Friends of Colorado State Parks, but also just of a citizen of Colorado. To see these groups that are up here in front of you get together in a room is pretty inspiring, to have those conversations and to figure out what our solutions and ideas can be for the future of Colorado. Of course, while inspiring, it also requires a lot of difficult work. And if you get 30-plus statewide leaders who have a great deal of influence in the same room and try to find a way to have them come to terms and some agreed opinions about how we're going to proceed is not too easy. And we spent the first year and a half talking about a number of issues, and it came very clear this past summer that we needed to sort of refine and define exactly what our purpose is. And is that going to click? There we go. And exactly what we were trying to achieve as the co-op. And so we came up with a purpose statement, and I will read it to you. It's not actually on this slide, but the Colorado Outdoor Partnership believes that a collaboration of leaders across the state of Colorado must innovate together to ensure our private and public lands remain viable to support our diverse wildlife, outdoor and agricultural heritage, and economic well-being. It goes on to say that to do this, the coalition is firmly committed to promoting the importance and stewardship of public and private lands and waters with emphasis on habitat conservation and outdoor recreation, supporting, improving, and strengthening public and private funding to conserve and strengthen these shared priorities. So to come up with that many words on a page, again, with all those influence in the room, took quite a bit of work, but everybody agreed to it. We had 100% consensus, and that's our purpose going forward. And from that, we started to develop our two committees, the Policy and Funding Committee and the Outreach Committee, to figure out how we were going to actually put our purpose to work. And all of a sudden, the group said, well, that's great that we have a purpose, but we also need to know where we're going. And so we looked around and said, well, we're going to need a vision now. And so we had to come back together, all 40 of us, and figure out what our vision for the future was going to be, so that when we go out to the public, we can talk about what we're working towards. And again, this is another inspiring moment with this group. We are just about to have consensus on this vision statement. In 2050, Colorado's people and economy thrive because of our healthy lands, water, wildlife, working farms and ranches, and improved hunting, angling, and outdoor recreation opportunities for all. My marketing side of me knows that's way too long of a vision statement, but we have it, and it's exciting because next month you'll actually be able to keep track of what the Colorado Outdoor Partnership is doing, because since we have all this on paper and we've agreed to it, we'll have a website that will be publicly available to view and see everything in our updates as they happen. And to back up really quickly, those decisions were possible because early on when this group met with Director Broscheid, we had figured out a set of principles that were bringing us together and that we can make these decisions from. So as a reminder, in 2016, this commission adopted the SHIFT principles, and those are the principles that the Colorado Outdoor Partnership has been using to have these conversations. It's a shared set of values and approaches to combining conservation and recreation to ensure that we can reach that vision and actually live out the purpose that we came up to. So it's a guide and a tool. We now shorthand the SHIFT principles as the Colorado Outdoor Principles, just to make it a little bit easier when we're referring to it. People know what those are. And I think a key thing to point out is that when we adopted these principles, we made them Coloradan because we added the private lands component. So when they came to us, they didn't have the private lands piece, but we saw that as an absolutely key element to being successful with what we're trying to achieve. So we added that principle in there, and these are on the table in front of us at every meeting. They're part of our discussions, and we're finding ways to live them out and reach that vision that we came up with. So thank you again for your time. Thank you for your support of the Colorado Outdoor Partnership, and I want to hand it on to Jim Peterson.
Thank you. Thanks, Matt. And again, I'm Jim Peterson. I'm the Colorado and Southwest Director for the
Trust for Public Land. It's a pleasure to be here before you today to talk about the Colorado Outdoor Partnership. I currently serve as the chair of the Policy and Funding Committee. It's a committee that has about 16 members. It's a very much ecumenical group, so we're open to the full membership. And we come together to, our charge is to strengthen, secure, and advance funding to support the conservation of Colorado's public and private lands and waters. Excuse me. The committee's first stop is the first stop for policy-related matters under consideration by the full co-op. We vet through review and discussion issues that the co-op, our co-op members would like to have go before the full committee for endorsement. We use the outdoor principles and our vision as our guide. We review and discuss these items, and we vote as a committee whether or not to advance things to the full co-op for endorsement. To date, the committee has recommended to the full co-op that it endorse two pieces of legislation at the state level. The first is the reauthorization of the Colorado Lottery, and the second, which should be formalized today, we hope, is the endorsement of the CPW's Future Generations legislation. At our next co-op meeting, we'll have a committee-led discussion about what other policy and funding matters the full co-op should discuss. To give you a sense of the things that are on the table, some members have brought up whether the co-op should look at the agricultural land easement program, which is part of the federal farm bill and brings important funding for private land conservation to Colorado. Another member has suggested that there's some pending legislation for making some improvements to the state conservation easement tax program. Another member has suggested that a piece of federal legislation called the Recreation Not Red Tape Act, which is winding through Congress now, be something we would look at. These are all just examples of the kind of things that members are talking about, but we'll have a formal committee process to look at these things. So looking ahead for the co-op, we know that there's a couple important challenges we have to confront. One of them was the one that Matt referenced, where we have such a large group of diverse state leaders, and we know that we got to maintain that unity, that balance, and accept the balance of viewpoints and priorities that this diverse group represents. We, as an organization, as a partnership, really depend on every member showing up at the meetings, willing to step outside of their own organizational silos and work for the good of the partnership. Second, we know that to be influential and effective, we have to increase our visibility. We have to become known as an organization. We have to be known for the diversity of our membership, from hunting and angling organizations to recreation organizations to conservation and private lands, agricultural organizations. It's really something that's unique, we think, in some ways in the country. It's certainly important and unique in the state. In closing, I'd like to say that I feel like that from my experience so far, that the membership is really committed to making this partnership a success. Folks understand that the state is in the midst, as Dan showed, of some really remarkable change. The pace is virtually unprecedented, whether we're looking at the Eastern Plains and the Front Range or the West Slope. Collectively, members really seem to have embraced and understand the challenges to our people, our wildlife, our economy, and the need to come together to really advance all of these issues in support of our people, our wildlife, and our economy. We know the work is urgent, and we know that we have a limited window of opportunity to ensure that future generations of Coloradoans enjoy the same quality of life that we have here today. And that is something that I think is really what keeps people at the table. These early stages of this, as Matt was suggesting, are very challenging because we're figuring out how to work together. And that's not easy when people come from such diverse organizations with diverse missions, diverse geographies, and so on. So thanks for the opportunity to be here before you today, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. I also want to thank Director Broscheid for the vision to initially bring this group together. And a big shout out to Dan Zimmer and Jody Kennedy for serving as the backbone of this group. We wouldn't be able to make it move forward in this formative stage without somebody helping get this thing going. So big thanks to everybody. Thank you.
Thank you. And thanks for all you do for the state. We appreciate it.
Absolutely.
So in your mailing, you should have full information on the co-op, a one-page summary sheet, the latest iteration of our governance documents for the co-op, as well as a copy of the shift principles. And at this time, if you have any questions, we'd be happy to answer them for you.
Commissioner Bray.
Thank you. Great presentation. I'm looking at your current member organizations, and to me, there's a couple of glaring omissions. You have one, what I call agriculture group, the Colorado Cattlemen's Association. Have you reached out, for example, to Farm Bureau, Farmers Union, other private land organizations, and also our sister agencies? I don't see the Department of Agriculture in here. I think they ought to be. Our state land board, they manage a lot of these properties, and I just don't see the balance there of those type of organizations.
Yeah, one of the things the steering committees looked at is that the representation and the balance of those varied entities on the commission, or on the coalition, I should say. We have invited the Farm Bureau. They are in the communications. We have not yet been able to have them to come to the table. They've been invited. They're on the email list. And then the other thing is just the right balance, like how many representations from each of those sectors are on the commission. We do have the Colorado Cattlemen's Agricultural Land Trust on there as well.
Mm-hmm. What about Department of Ag?
As far as the member organizations at this point, what the coalition is trying to do, what the steering committee has decided, is we want to get through these initial forming, storming, and norming stages, and then we do address that in the governance documents, that we need to continue to look at that, making sure we have the right representation and balance, so that'll be an issue the steering committee looks at moving forward.
Thank you.
Commissioner Zimmerman.
Could I add one thing to that? So one of the things we just figured out too is how we were going to vote as an organization. And we took a very courageous step to be a consensus-based decision process. So instead of each individual on the committee having one sort of vote and looking for a majority, we're actually working very hard to make decisions that everybody agrees on. And part of the emphasis there is that people step outside of maybe the way they would usually think about some of these issues and think about the bigger whole. And so while we continue to work to find that right balance of members, one of our sort of guiding principles when we make decisions is that we try to make decisions that represent everybody that's in the room and those interests that are in the shift principles. So if the balance is out for a while in one way or another, our goal with decision making is to represent everybody and all of those interests in the room, which is, it's a little bit of a nuance and a fine task, but I think people are up to doing it. Thanks.
Commissioner Zimmerman.
I want to commend you guys. This is obviously a lot of hard work and long road traveled, and I really want to commend everyone for all the work, and Director Broscheid for pulling this group together at the Partners Conference, in 2015 was when you guys first started. I think that was my first year I went to Shift, and was able to present on a panel there, and really got to understand what it was we were after from a Shift perspective and how that transferred to Colorado. And of course, this is something I talk about a lot. I know from Margaret Taylor and from Assistant Director West that we have a number of groups, maybe not a number, maybe 2 or 3 groups that are working on this balance of use and protection of our natural resources. And I know it's very important for our private land managers, our public land managers, our conservation groups, everyone to get involved. I think there's another group specific, which I know Shift is focused on, with recreation. So your IMBA groups, your public access rock climbing groups, mountaineering type folks, kayaking type folks. So I'm wondering, are you guys going to be doing any kind of a linkage partnership to that group? I recognize it would be a little unwieldy to have everybody in all of that in one room at this point in time, but knowing that all of these groups are moving in the same direction of how do we address this big dilemma on the table in front of us.
Yeah, one of the issues that came up at our most recent committee meeting of the Outreach Committee and the Combined Visioning Work Group was the fact that there's multiple initiatives that are kind of happening on a statewide basis, and even beyond the state. When you mentioned the the work of the Shift Group out of Wyoming. So we've done the Outreach Committee's done some research on that, and actually at the meeting next week, we'll be presenting on what these various initiatives are, just to make sure, one, we're aware of what's going on, and two, to look for opportunities that we could collaborate potentially.
Thanks very much. Great presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
We're going to go off agenda here for just a minute. Commissioner Bray wanted to talk to one of the herd management plans from yesterday. So, Commissioner Bray, do you want to give us the issue?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'm sorry to put you back on the spot, but I was thinking about your presentation yesterday, and I appreciate it very much, but I've gone through a lot of these herd management plans over the years, and sometimes we don't ask enough questions, and sometimes it just seems it's going to show up on our consent agenda down the road, and we're going to pass it, and then we go down our merry road. What I would request, and I guess you get to be the guinea pig for this, but I would request it for all future management plans throughout the state. I would request in every management plan just a one-page bullet point summary of your objectives and strategies to get to those objectives. In case in point, in your area, you propose to increase the elk herd. Give me some bullet points of proposed management decisions we're going to do how we're going to do that. We're going to collaborate with New Mexico, for example.
Sure.
We're going to, just some bullet points of how we're going to get to your goals.
Sure.
And I would request that of all future management plans because, and I think in light of our chronic wasting disease discussion and all these other issues that come forth all the time, we need a revisitation prior to 10 years. And I understand you cannot shift these big herd decisions overnight with 1 or 2 years, but I'd like to see some bullet points of just some strategies of how we're going to get where we want to go.
Okay. To those, that would be to those proposed objectives that we've come up with, those that are preferred.
Both deer and elk,
Deer and elk.
whatever. And
any species, yeah. Okay, sure.
that's it.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Okay, next up is public comment, and we have Mr. Behrens is here and would like to come forward. So Denny, if you'd like to come up, we appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Commissioners, my name is Denny Behrens with Big Game Forever. I don't like to be the bearer of bad news, but I attended the wolf meeting last night in Carbondale. And the good news was that the audience was about 70-30, of 70% being the livestock industry, outfitters, sportsmen, and people that I think really have a common sense view as far as wolves are concerned in the state of Colorado. But Mr. Phillips presented his major slide presentation and some video information. Some of it was pretty misleading. He got called on the carpet by 2 individuals. J. Paul Brown was one of them, and a guy by the name of Rick Davis, who's a CBA representative. And some of his information was not correct. And so, but the thrust of his presentation is they want 500 wolves introduced into western Colorado, and they are not going to give up on that. And so the crowd was very respectful, I will say. 2 people got up and talked in favor of the introduction, and 9 people got up and spoke in opposition to that. J. Paul Brown was one of them. And so it's very interesting that 2 meetings have taken place so far on the western slope, one in Steamboat, and also now the one in Carbondale. There's another one in Aspen tonight. And I believe the Farm Bureau and wool growers are going to be attending that. I was glad to see, as far as NGOs, the Elk Foundation was there, of course we were there, CBA was there, and a number of the smaller organizations were there, and basically trying to get information to understand where these people are coming from. And one thing that's very obvious to us, they don't understand the word no. It's going to be an issue that we're going to have to deal with in this state. We know that. Sooner or later, as it continues to build in this state, one of the things you need to understand is that they said in the presentation that 70% of the survey that was done, 70% of people feel that there should be wolves in Colorado. We don't believe that's accurate at all. And I think if you walked over the other side of Eisenhower Tunnel and took that, that would be totally reversed. So other than that, Big Game Forever is also doing a banquet in Pagosa Springs, March 10th, which I'm inviting you all to at this time. I was contacted by Dick Ray, one of your former colleagues, past commissioner, about the issue that's going on in the Pagosa Ranger District. Over 50% of the trails, backcountry trails in the Pagosa District area are closed to beetle kill deadfall. Forest Service can't keep up with it. And the Forest Service can't go out and solicit funds. They can't hold a banquet, they can't hold a raffle, they can't do any of that. And so we were asked to host the banquet, which we're doing, Big Game Forever, with the Pagosa Area Trails Council, and we're hoping to raise funds down there that will end up in the Youth Corps, which will be able to go and help the Forest Service open trails this year. Cool. You wonder why is Big Game Forever interested in this? We are seeing outfitters that are canceling pack trips because they can't get into their camps. Dick Ray canceled 2 out of 3 trips this last fall or summer because they couldn't get in. And the amount of timber that's falling right now, not only in Pagosa, I mean, you people know this, it's happening all up the whole Continental Divide. And it's going to become a big issue because if we can't get in there to hunt or we can't get in there to hike, then the economy of those areas go down and it's a huge impact. So I'm inviting you, if you've got the time, come on down. We've also got Senator Gardner's office involved in this, Congressman Tipton, and we're in the process of hooking up with Senator Bennett's office to see if we can't start to generate something that's going to run up the totem pole to get Washington more involved in what's going on out here. It affects people's lives, it affects people's economy, their livelihoods, and something needs to be done. So anyway, thank you so much for your time. And
Denny, where's the banquet?
What?
Where's the location of the banquet?
It's in Pagosa at the community center. So
What day was it?
March 10th.
March 10th.
What time?
Do
you have something you can email?
if you want to go on, we'll get it to you. We'll get it to all of you. There's flyers out there right now. You can go on to Big Game Forever Colorado Facebook page and see it there as well. But I will send it out. We'll get it to Adrian so she gets it to all of you. But it's a huge issue. And it, believe it or not, it's really funny because you talk about 2 spectrums of people. You have, which some people on my side of the fence call the spandex people. And on their side of the fence, they call us the blood sport people. But we're coming together to work on this issue because it affects us all. So we look forward to seeing all of you down there. Thank you.
Commissioner Hauser, I think you had a comment for
I do. Thank you,
Barris.
Mr. Chairman, and I'm risking my own getting to the airport. I'm trying to stay for the consent agenda action item. You used the word "these people" in your commentary about the Wolf meeting. I'm curious who those people are and who hosted the meeting in Carbondale and who's organizing these conversations on the Western Slope.
There's a naturalist group up there in between Carbondale and Aspen, and they actually do education programs. And this was on their agenda for this one. They've actually said that they will host in this fall for a opportunity for groups to come together with the opposite viewpoint to be able to come and do a presentation. And I know that Big Game Forever is going to be involved in that, so.
Thanks. I would just encourage the identification of whatever host groups, and let's try to refer to them in that context. Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you, Denny.
You bet.
Next up is the consent agenda. Chair would entertain a motion to consider the consent agenda.
So moved.
Second.
I think we can do this by voice vote. All in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much. Next up will be our legal presentation. Are we going into executive session, counsel?
Yeah, I think that would be appropriate. Nick Lopez is here. I think he wants to give you a brief update on the 5-star litigation involving CPW, and if I could just run through the open meetings law requirements here. During the break, we're going to go into executive session pursuant to the open meetings law, which is 24.6.4023A Roman 2, which allows the commission to enter into executive session for conference with an attorney representing the board to discuss disputes that are the subject of pending or imminent court action. And as I stated previously, Mr. Lopez is going to give you an update on the CPW versus 5-star feedlot case pending in Yuma County, which is 16 CV 30022. And at this time, I think it's appropriate for you to invite a motion to go into executive session.
So moved.
Motion by Mr. McDaniel, second by Commissioner Vigil, I think.
It's me and somebody else.
I think we have to have a poll on this one, so.
Bray?
Yes.
Haskett? McDaniel?
Yes.
Peisel?
Yes.
Spahar?
Yes.
Vigil?
Yes.
Wingfield?
Yes.
Zimmerman? Absent? Zip?
Yes.
And Chairman Howard?
Yes.
Motion carried unanimously.
open session. The commission received a brief status update from Nick Lopez concerning...
Council, I'm not sure we're quite back.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you.
We're back in open session. The commission briefly received a status update from Assistant Attorney General Nick Lopez pursuant to the open meetings law concerning the 5-star litigation. No decisions were made.
I believe that's the last item on our agenda unless anyone has anything else. Thank you very much to staff and to, well, I guess the public's not here, but I'll thank them over the loudspeaker here. Oh, Commissioner.
Were you going to talk about that resolution?
Pardon me?
Resolution?
Oh, the GOCO resolution. Thank you very much. I have been going back and forth here with the director and his proposal. Bob, why don't you make the proposal here, and we'll see if the commission is okay with it.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, this would totally I totally spaced this. But, you know, as the GOCO or lottery reauthorization is going, and certainly this is a big benefactor of that, it seems to make a whole lot of sense, and I've been checking in with Doug Vilsack as well, is to say, you know, would the commission be supportive of a resolution in support of that lottery reauthorization bill, and do that in a form of a resolution or some other kind of a statement. And now that the meeting's over, what we can do is staff we can draft this resolution real quick. We can certainly run it by the commission, you know, via email or some other acceptable method, and then have the chairman sign it once. I think all the commissioners can say, I have no problem with this, I think this is great. Or you can just totally trust us to work with the chairman, and then we can CC you on getting this out. So my bad for not even raising this as an alternative. I think if we brought it yesterday, we could probably have a draft today that you could look at. So I apologize for that, but I don't think it's too late. I think we can craft something very, very supportive, very strong in support of the bill and the importance that lottery and GOCO is to the agency and for the natural resources, and kind of frame it in that aspect, and then have the chair sign on behalf of the commission. But whatever your pleasure.
Oh, I'd be totally comfortable with the chair and the director working on this and getting something out. I don't know that we need to spend a lot of time bicycling it around. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
We'll do that.
Trust the government?
Come on, I'm private enterprise here.
Thank you, guys.
Anything
Sorry
else,
about that.
any other matters? Well, thank you very much, folks. Appreciate it.